Have you ever stopped to think about how societies, these huge, seemingly solid things, can just change so dramatically? How one generation dreams of a better future and, well, the next one gets something completely different, often in ways nobody saw coming.
It really is a profound question, isn't it? You look at the history books, the hopes, the struggles, the massive shifts in power and how people thought, even just daily life, it's filled with these incredible stories.
Exactly. And that, listener, is what we're diving into today. We're embarking on a really significant exploration, looking at those huge changes that swept across Europe, eventually leading up to the Russian Revolution, and everything that followed complex doesn't even begin to cover it.
Yeah, think of it like we're detectives piecing together clues from our sources.
Right. It's a historical detective story. By digging into these accounts, you'll get a clear but deep understanding of the ideas and the events that basically reshaped a whole continent
Hmm.
and sparked one of the most pivotal revolutions in history.
It's not just about dates and names. It's about the why, you know, the human side of it, the struggle, and the sheer, sometimes brutal force of change.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. Picture Europe before the 18th century. Our sources give us this vivid image of a world just fundamentally different from ours. Forget nations or social classes as we know them.
Right, it was all about estates and orders.
Oh,
Who you were born as, well, that pretty much decided your life.
a really rigid system. You can see how it was kind of ripe for change, even if people back then couldn't imagine the scale of what was coming.
And what our sources show so well is how these old structures started to crack, slowly at first maybe, under the pressure of new ideas, new philosophies. Moving into the 18th century, you start seeing distinct political groups forming, each with a totally different idea about the future.
Take the early liberals. It's fascinating, actually. Our sources show they wanted things like religious tolerance, and they definitely pushed back against powerful kings. Progressive for the time, right?
Absolutely.
But here's the twist. Their idea of liberty, it was pretty limited. They mostly thought only men with property should get to vote. Not everyone. It shows how even radical ideas can be shaped by the world they come from, doesn't it?
It really does. And then you compare them to the radicals, the chalk and cheese, really. Radicals wanted a government based on what the majority of people wanted. That was revolutionary talk back then.
And our sources point out they strongly backed votes for women, too. Much more inclusive, much more, well, radical thinking than the liberals.
Definitely. And then there were the conservatives, especially after the French Revolution sent shockwaves everywhere. They weren't totally against change. Our sources say they accepted some change had to happen.
But how?
Slowly. That was their key thing. Through a slow process, respecting the past, tradition. Definitely not sudden revolutions. They wanted to kind of manage the future, not jump into it head first.
So you can almost hear the ground shifting under people's feet, can't you? These ideas weren't just talk. They were chipping away at the old ways, setting the stage for, well, centuries of upheaval to come. Like a quiet hum before the storm.
And what a storm indeed. Because alongside these ideas, you had the raw power of the Industrial Revolution hitting. This wasn't just about fancy new machines. It fundamentally changed how people lived.
Yeah, our sources really emphasize the human cost of all this progress in the 19th century. Beyond the shiny inventions, what was the reality for ordinary people?
That's such a vital point.
Yeah.
Because for so many, it was anything but progress. Our sources paint a pretty bleak picture. Incredibly long hours, terrible wages, constant fear of unemployment. Forget about nice houses or everyone getting richer overnight.
Not the story we sometimes hear.
Not at all. For many, it was just a grim, tough existence. And it really made people question if this progress was actually fair, you know.
And that questioning. That's where the socialists really step in. But they had this core idea, highlighted in our sources, that private property wasn't sacred. In fact, they saw it as the root of all social ills.
A pretty radical diagnosis. And their proposed cure. Society as a whole should control property, not individuals.
We see some early attempts to make this real, right? Like Robert Owen.
Yes, Robert Owen, an English factory owner, quite remarkably, tried to build a cooperative community called New Harmony. It was a bold experiment, trying to prove a different way of organizing society was actually possible.
But then Karl Marx enters the picture, and his ideas just took things to another level. He argued, didn't he, that workers, not the factory owners, were the ones actually creating the wealth, the profit?
Precisely. And here's the really explosive part, which our sources stress. Marx said that for workers to get free from this exploitation, they couldn't just ask nicely. They had to overthrow capitalism entirely, overthrow the whole system of private property and build a completely socialist society.
Wow. No half measures there. That's a call for total revolution.
Absolutely. And these ideas spread like wildfire. Our sources mention that by the 1870s, socialists realized they needed to work together across borders. They set up the Second International.
Sort of like an early global network for socialists.
Exactly, a way to coordinate, share ideas, and show that the working class was becoming this international force.
And powerful symbols emerged too, didn't they? Like the Paris Commune.
Ah, yes, the Paris Commune of 1871. Short-lived, tragically, but it left this powerful legacy. The workers' red flag, the Marseillaise song, they became these instantly recognized symbols of the fight for liberty for socialists everywhere. It proved, even briefly, that a workers' government could exist.
So you've got these harsh economic conditions hitting people hard, coupled with these incredibly powerful revolutionary ideas offering a completely different future. It's a direct challenge to the way things were.
Undeniably. They weren't just theories anymore. They were like blueprints for a new world, clashing head-on with the old one. You can just feel the tension building, setting the stage for massive conflicts.
And perhaps nowhere was that tension building quite like in Imperial Russia. Let's shift our focus there. A unique giant, really, teetering on the edge. In 1914, you've got Tsar Nicholas II ruling this enormous empire.
And it felt, in many ways, like a different world compared to Western Europe, didn't it? Almost stuck in time.
Yeah, what's truly staggering, and our sources really highlight this, is how agricultural it was. At the start of the 20th century, something like 85% of the people in the Russian Empire worked in farming.
85%. That paints such a clear picture. Mostly pre-industrial, which is a huge difference from places like Britain or Germany, and absolutely key to understanding why Russia's revolution was so unique.
The industry was creeping in, wasn't it, and bringing its own problems?
Oh, definitely. And the conditions were brutal, often piled on top of existing hardships. Our sources talk about workdays in small workshops, sometimes hitting 15 hours. 15. Even in the bigger factories, 10 or 12 hours was normal. The toll on people was immense, building up so much resentment. And there was something else unique about the Russian countryside, a specific peasant custom. The mir.
Ah, the mir. Tell us about that.
Well, unlike peasants elsewhere in Europe, Russian peasants traditionally pooled their land together periodically. The village commune, the mir, would then divide it up based on the needs of each family.
So a kind of built-in communal system.
Exactly. A very old, distinctive feature of rural life. Maybe a hint of collective ownership that would ironically become a major battleground later on.
So let's put it all together. You've got this autocratic Tsar, this huge peasant population living under tough conditions, brutal factory work for some, and these unique communal traditions. Our sources show this created a really volatile mix.
Fertile ground for revolution, you could say. But a revolution that would look very different from those brewing in the West. A real pressure cooker situation.
And the ideas fueling it were taking root. The Russian Social Democratic Workers' Party, founded back in 1898. Strongly influenced by Marx, our sources confirm, but trying to apply his ideas to Russia's specific situation.
Right, and this is where we see a really critical split in thinking, which our sources flag up. It was between the socialist revolutionaries and the social democrats, especially the faction led by Lenin. The big disagreement was about the peasants.
What was Lenin's take on them? It was quite controversial, wasn't it?
Hugely controversial, especially for the time. Lenin basically argued that peasants were not all the same. They weren't one united group. You had poor peasants, richer ones, laborers, some who were almost like small capitalists.
So different economic interests within the peasantry itself.
Exactly. And because of that, Lenin believed they couldn't act as a single, unified force for a socialist revolution. He saw the industrial working class as the key driver. This rejection of the peasantry as the revolutionary class really set his group, the future Bolsheviks, apart.
And given how repressive Tsarist Russia was, Lenin also had very specific ideas about how the party itself should be structured, didn't he?
Yes, our sources make this clear. He didn't want a big, open mass party. He thought it needed to be small, highly disciplined, controlling who could join, focusing on quality and dedication. A tight-knit group of professional revolutionaries, a vanguard party. This idea would be absolutely crucial later on.
All this simmering tension just boiled over in 1905, didn't it, with Bloody Sunday?
Ah, Bloody Sunday. Such a pivotal moment. Imagine thousands of workers, completely unarmed, marching peacefully to the Tsar's Winter Palace with a petition.
And they were just attacked. Brutally.
Yes. Our sources describe it as more than just violence. It shattered the image of the Tsar as a protective father figure. It really ignited the first open flames of rebellion across the country. the 1905 revolution.
The Tsar did concede something, though, didn't he? The Duma.
He did, under pressure. He allowed an elected parliament, the Duma, to be created. But, as our sources show, it was mostly consultative, not really holding power, and he dismissed the first couple of Dumas very quickly when they challenged him.
So it showed he wasn't really willing to share power.
Not genuinely, no. It was a temporary measure. But the whole 1905 episode, even though it was eventually crushed, showed the Tsar wasn't untouchable. And it showed the growing power of these revolutionary ideas, even when facing harsh repression. The stage was definitely being set.
And then came 1917. The First World War really pushed Russia over the edge, didn't it?
Catastrophically so. Our sources paint a really grim picture by 1916. The war effort was crippling industry. Railways were breaking down, essential equipment was falling apart, food shortages, chaos. Russia was really starting to crumble from the inside out.
And then the February Revolution kicked off in Petrograd.
Yes.
Started with factory lockouts, strikes, famously on International Women's Day.
Yes, the sheer frustration and hardship fueled by the war just exploded onto the streets. People had simply had enough.
And there's that critical moment, February 27th, the soldier.
Absolutely pivotal. Our sources highlight this. The cavalry, the Tsar's usual enforcers, were ordered to fire on the crowds, and they refused. That refusal, it signaled that the Tsar had lost control even of the military. The game was basically up for the old regime.
And the end came fast after that. March 2nd, 1917, the Tsar's own military commanders advised him to abdicate.
Just like that. Over 3 centuries of Romanov rule gone. An absolutely stunning moment in history.
Then Lenin returns in April and drops his April theses. What were the key demands there?
Our sources pinpoint 3 main things. End the war immediately, give land to the peasants, and nationalize the banks. Radical stuff. But just as important was what he didn't support, the provisional government that had taken over. He wanted a clean break, full socialist revolution, no compromises. And to make it happen, the Petrograd Soviet, under Leon Trotsky, set up the Military Revolutionary Committee. This was the group tasked specifically, our sources say, with organizing the actual seizure of power. Very deliberate, very planned.
Which brings us to October 24th, 1917, the night it all happened. The ship Aurora shelling the Winter Palace.
A truly dramatic moment. And by the next day, the city was largely under the committee's control. The provisional government basically collapsed. That was the October Revolution, the Bolsheviks seizing power.
And they moved fast once they were in charge. New name, right?
Yes, the Russian Communist Party, Bolshevik.
Yeah.
And they immediately started putting those April theses into action. Our sources confirm. Most industry and banks nationalized, land declared social property. Radical changes, almost overnight.
But it wasn't a smooth transition to this new world. There was the Constituent Assembly issue in early 1918.
Right. Lenin dismissed it. He argued, controversially, that the All-Russian Congress of Soviets, basically the workers' and soldiers' councils, was more democratic than this assembly elected under, as he put it, uncertain conditions before the Bolshevik takeover. A clear move towards consolidating power in the hands of the party and the Soviets.
And then came the Civil War, 1918 to 1920. Sounds like a horrific period.
Truly grim, based on our sources. Widespread chaos, looting, banditry, terrible famine across the country. It shows the immense, terrible cost that often comes with such fundamental societal upheaval. But through it all, the Bolsheviks managed to consolidate their power.
So after the war, the focus shifted to actually building this new Soviet society. How did they approach the economy?
They went for centralized planning, specifically the famous 5-year plans. Our sources explain this system. State officials would basically map out the economy, assess performance, and set targets for production over fixed periods. The goal was rapid industrialization, all directed from the top.
But this state control had a dark side, especially under Stalin and his collectivization policy, targeting the kulaks.
Yes, Stalin pushed hard for collectivization, forcing peasants onto large, state-controlled farms. He targeted the so-called kulaks, the more prosperous peasants, accusing them of being greedy capitalists, hoarding grain to drive up prices. They became scapegoats for economic problems.
And the resistance. And the consequences.
Fierce resistance and absolutely brutal consequences. Our sources are horrifyingly clear on this. Peasants slaughtered their own animals rather than hand them over. Millions resisted, and the state response was ruthless.
There's a report you mentioned.
Yes, K.M. Carlson's report from 1930. It's chilling. It describes tens of thousands just in Ukraine, between February and March 1930 alone, being arrested, shot, sent to labor camps, or just exiled internally for resisting collectivization. The human cost was staggering.
A truly harsh reality check on the revolutionary dream.
It really was. And what our sources show, looking back from the 1950s, is this growing recognition, even within the Soviet Union and the broader socialist movement worldwide, that the way the Soviet state operated wasn't living up to the original ideals of the revolution. Essential freedoms were crushed by repressive policies.
It makes you think, doesn't it, about how revolutionary ideals can get twisted when they meet the hard realities of power and control.
Absolutely, a paradox that runs through so much of history.
But despite all the internal problems and brutality, the Russian Revolution absolutely captivated the world, didn't it? Its influence spread far and wide.
Oh, massively. Our sources show it reached places as far away as India. It became this huge global event, sparking debate, inspiring movements, creating fear.
You mentioned figures like Tagore and Nehru visiting.
Yes, leading intellectuals like Rabindranath Tagore and future leaders like Jawaharlal Nehru actually went to Russia to see Soviet socialism for themselves and wrote about it.
Yeah.
There was intense curiosity.
And some early positive impressions, too.
There were. Shakhat Usmani, for instance, wrote in 1920 about being impressed by seeing Europeans and Asians mixing freely, a sense of real equality and brotherhood among the many nationalities in Soviet Russia. For people living under colonial rule, that vision was incredibly powerful.
And circling back briefly to that peasant commune, the Mir, that old tradition of collective land. Quite ironic, isn't it?
It really is. Our sources point to this irony. This ancient communal practice seemed, on the surface, to fit the Bolshevik vision, but it ended up being at the heart of the brutal conflict during collectivization, a stark example of new ideals clashing violently with old ways of life.
So looking at the big picture, the Soviet experiment, flaws and all, became this major global force. It generated huge hope for some, deep fear for others, and really defined the battle lines for much of the 20th century.
Absolutely shaped the century we live through.
What an incredible and often tragic story we followed today. From those old European orders, the birth of these world-changing ideas, through the fire of industrialization, the collapse of the Tsar, the rise of the Soviet Union, and its really complex, often brutal legacy.
And we hope that by joining us on this deep dive, you, the listener, feel you have a richer context now. Understanding these historical shifts really does help make sense of political and social movements happening even today. History isn't just the past, its currents run right through the present.
So we'll leave you with a final thought to chew on. When you see how the determined pursuit of these grand ideals for society can lead to outcomes so vastly different, sometimes tragically different from what was originally intended, what lessons can we really take away about that difficult balance between the collective good and individual freedom? A question that's just as relevant now as it ever was.